Well, good morning. This is our first meeting in February. Hopefully the extreme cold days of January are behind us. Michigan's legislators are back in Lansing with a full schedule planned in the weeks ahead. Today we'll talk with one of the new members of the Michigan Senate. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Ed McBroom was elected last November to represent Michigan's 38th Senate District, which includes all of Upper Michigan except Luce, Chippewa, and Mackinac counties. He previously served 3 terms representing the 108th District in the Michigan House. When he's not serving in Lansing, he's a dairy farmer in Dickinson County. Senator McBroom is our guest this morning. Senator, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thanks very much, Don.
I should say welcome back. You've been here many times before. Although this is my first time to welcome you as a senator. That has a nice ring to it.
It's a bit stuffy for me. I'm still trying to get used to it.
You know, I was surprised, when I was reading some things about this Senate session, that 30 of the senators are new.
Yes.
That's a lot of turnover, isn't it?
It's one of the key problems we have with term limits right now is just bringing in so many new people all at once. And I think out of the 30 new people, 9 of them have never served in either the House or the Senate before. So it's a lot of new people. The House has over 40 new people out of the 110. This is part of Michigan's instability that comes from term limits.
I know the new leader in the Senate is Senator Mike Shirkey. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Mike and I have been good friends since we served together in the House. He's a good man, a good Christian man who's just always an optimist and very analytical and very determined to find solutions to problems. He loves to find new ways of getting things done, and if he runs up against one wall, he turns and works on the problem from a new angle. He's tasked me with a lot of great opportunity this term, and really I think is going to be a great leader for us.
And you've put together your staff, which includes former Senator Tom Casperson.
Yep, Tom's gotten to be such a good friend over the years, and I hated to lose the knowledge that he had acquired and a lot of the contacts he has with folks that are all across the UP. And so hopefully, and already Tom is just helping with that transition by being able to connect me and help me know who I need to call on certain issues and reach out to on certain circumstances and bills.
As I was looking over some information, I see where you are the caucus dean. Tell us about that.
Well, the caucus dean is a position that's predates term limits and was generally given to the person with the greatest seniority who wasn't in a leadership position. Generally serves as a bit of a kind of the social conscience of the caucus. Over the years since term limits have come into place, I think the position has evolved a little bit, and nowadays I was the caucus dean in the House as well for 2 years, and really serves as kind of you could almost say as a pastor to the caucus, especially when folks have personal issues with health or deaths in the family. I work on making sure the caucus has a presence and reaches out to them, offers prayer and support, and really function for both caucuses. I did that for both the Republicans and the Democrats in the House, and plan to do that as well in the Senate. It serves as a bit of a conscience and a spiritual voice on a lot of issues.
Okay. You've been named chairman of the Natural Resources Committee and the Oversight Committee.
Yep.
Are you happy with those assignments?
Yeah, very much so. I requested both of those. Very excited to have that privilege. Continue the long tradition of Upper Peninsula senators chairing the Natural Resources Committee. Joe Mack did for many years. Tom had it for all 8 of his years in service. I'm sure there's been other ones too that I'm not as up on, but it's a great opportunity for us to make sure that the culture and the economics that we have here in the UP that are so tied to natural resources have that voice at the table that we need to make sure that anytime an issue comes up that's related to those, that the Upper Peninsula has that premier voice in discussing those policy changes.
Now, I know committee chairs have a fair amount of power in determining what legislation actually gets to the Senate, doesn't it?
Oftentimes, the Constitution is very specific that no committee can keep a bill from being heard by the whole chamber. The chamber always has the power to move that bill forward without the committee or the committee chair's permission. But generally speaking, the chairs have a lot of influence on that discussion by setting their agendas, setting the discussion times, who gets invited in to testify. So it is a very important position, especially on something that's so critical to the life and culture of the Upper Peninsula.
Are there any particular items on the agenda right now that you're concerned about coming before the Natural Resources Committee?
Well, so far, the bills that have been referred to the committee, there have been very few, just a couple, a handful, and so we haven't really set up a robust agenda yet. We'll start off with some introductory things, especially for newer members to the issues. Updates on CWD, updates on some of the hunting and fishing regulations, work on timber issues, mining issues. So there's a lot to bring the committee members up to speed first before we really start delving into developing policy.
We have a new director, of course, with a new governor of the Natural Resources
Yes.
Commission. Do you have a good working relationship there?
With Mr. Eichinger?
Right.
So Mr. Eichinger and I have known each other, I think, since I started serving in 2011. Worked together on some issues, worked against each other on some issues. So I'd say, yeah, we have a good working relationship.
And tell us a little bit about what the Oversight Committee does.
Well, the Oversight Committee is really pretty new to the Senate in recent time. Since term limits, both chambers really allowed that committee to kind of fall into disuse, and the Senate didn't even have one until a couple years ago. I chaired the Oversight Committee, though, in the House and worked very hard to bring the committee back to life. And I'm anxious to do that as well in the Senate. We take up all of the audits that have material findings from the Auditor General and many of the ones with reportable findings. We also bring in the departments to ask them questions in general about how they're operating, what they're doing. Folks come to me and say, here's a series of problems with the department, whether those are my constituents or are other members in the chamber. I can bring that department in and interview them about why they're doing things this way, how we can fix those operations, how we can make things work better, and really hold the departments accountable to the law and to the citizens.
Okay. You're going to be working, or in fact you are working with a new governor. We'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes.
Great.
Back with more on the Ryan Report after this break. Guest this morning is Senator Ed McBroom. As I mentioned before the break, you are working with a new governor. Governor Whitmer was elected. I think this is your first time in the legislature working with a governor from the other party?
That's correct. During my time in the House, it was always Rick Snyder.
Okay, what do you expect is going to happen? We keep hearing the word bipartisanship
Sure.
from a lot of people. Do you think that's going to work?
Well, it has to.
It has to work.
It has to. And nobody should ever think that during the 8 years of Rick Snyder that there wasn't bipartisan things that went on. Governor Snyder was not very political when it came right down to it. And so he passed some things over Republican objections and got some things passed over Democrat objections. But I think with Governor Whitmer, it's more of a mandate than ever. I mean, it's going to be impossible to do the business of the state without being bipartisan.
Well, ultimately, you all have to agree on a budget, right?
That's right.
To begin with, so.
Budgets and other priorities, I think it'll be a good thing. I think we can get a lot of positive things done. I think we can also, kind of do little checks and balances and hopefully keep some, not so good policies from happening as well.
Okay. One of the issues she campaigned on was fixing the roads.
Yeah.
And of course, some things were done in the last session to address that, but people feel it's not adequate. I also see now where some former legislators are proposing a rather large increase in the gas tax, 47 cents, perhaps to be phased in. What do you think might happen this year?
Well, I think it's notable to look at what was done before. While I was there in 15, some of the changes that were made are being implemented in. And so they're already on schedule because Michigan didn't even have the infrastructure to just immediately jump up the road funding without not having people to go out and pave roads or do the road work. And so it was phased in over time, and there's more coming. And if you've driven around last summer downstate or even up here in the UP, you'd see significant new projects are underway, and you can talk to your road commissions about the increase that they're seeing and that they anticipate coming. So I think that there's already good things in the works. What new things the governor might propose remain to be seen. She's planning to give that message here in the next month, so we'll get an opportunity to see exactly what she has in mind. But this proposal from those two gentlemen to go up 47 cents, I don't think that that's even a place we're going to start talking about, not with the increases that have already been put in place. And you know, ultimately Michigan has a significant problem with road funding because of the structure of the taxes. We collect an enormous amount of taxes at the pump, but only a portion of them actually go to roads. And so I welcome the help of the governor or anybody else in doing a significant restructure. If we can make sure that every dollar that people pay at the pump goes to roads, that's going to be a huge victory for the state, for roads, for people. It's going to make it a lot simpler in the future. If needs are needed, we can go to the people and say, here, all of what you're paying, this is how much it's getting us. Right now we can't do that. It's too complicated because, well, here's everything you're paying, but here's what's going to roads. And then there's this other pot that also adds to the roads. And then some of this goes to schools, and if we want to take that, then we have to figure out a way to fund schools. It's just a mess. Okay. And so until we fix that, it's always going to be complicated. And if the governor has a plan, I've heard some rumors that she has a plan to get bipartisan support to simplify that process, that's going to be a tremendous victory for the future of Michigan.
And some issues just don't go away. One is the so-called big box store issue, and
That's right.
I've seen you quoted recently on that. Is something going to happen this term, do you think?
I think we have a great possibility. You know, during my time in the House, we passed a fix to this issue. The courts also ruled in our favor and against the tribunal and said what the tribunal is doing is wrong. Legislature or tribunal, fix it. And so we've been trying, but we had one person, and you talked about the power of a committee chairmanship. We had a committee chair who just would not take up the issue in the Senate before. Well, he's gone now. We have a different committee chair, and I'm hoping that he'll be much more amenable to discussions with this. Perhaps he can't support it, but can he give us the opportunity to win the votes that Tom had worked so hard to do while he was in the Senate? I think we have to. There's just a mandate on our communities, on our state, to fix this problem. When you look at the numbers and you say these stores are not participating fairly in our communities, they're demanding services, but they're allowing the traditional mom and pop stores that were here first to carry the full brunt of the burden. They're taking away from our libraries, they're taking away from our services, police and fire. That's not right. Why should our other stores be placed at this extreme disadvantage? And all you have to do is look at the average that they're paying. They are getting a loophole that allows them to be so far below the regional or national average of property taxes. If you and I could do that for our homes by simply saying, well, I'm not selling my house, but if I sold it, I'd like my comparable to be some dilapidated house in a economically depressed area. That's how much property tax I want to pay. But when I sell it, I want it to be over here. You and I aren't allowed to do that. Why are these stores being allowed to continue down this loophole that they found? We need to fix it.
We'll see what happens this term. And we'll have some more questions for you, and we'll be back to talk with you in just a couple of minutes. Again, our guest this morning is Senator Ed McBroom. We were talking about the fact that there are still some issues carrying over from before. Obviously, car insurance rates is a big one. I know some bills have been introduced in the House and the Senate. What's going to happen there?
Well, I'm really excited to report that it is the prime goal, the number one goal of our leadership in the Senate and over in the House to get cost reductions to people's car insurance. It's the first bill introduced in both chambers, and the House has even set up a special select committee that's only job is working on cutting costs of car insurance. That's the only work that committee is going to do and propose. And we're fortunate that from the UP, Representative Bo Lefebvre is sitting on that committee, and he's a real champion on this issue. So I know people are impatient, and I was getting letters at the end of November, why haven't you fixed things yet? But it takes time in the legislative process, but we're really attacking the problem with full gusto. I'm glad that some members who wouldn't support reforms before aren't back, and I hope that we can build the coalition we need to get real reforms that save people money.
I know there are some concerns on the part of some that there are benefits to the program we have, that they not be lost.
Yeah, I know, and that's something, first of all, I mean, nobody who's already in that program is looking at any changes. Nobody's proposing changes to the current recipients of the lifetime benefits. But the overall costs of running this program versus the amount of folks who are adversely impacted by paying for it cannot be ignored any longer. The program has gotten fantastically expensive compared to the $4 that were paid for when the program was first initiated. And on top of that, the lawyers over the years have just eroded this program through lawsuits. It's made Swiss cheese of the whole thing. And so you have just ridiculous changes that have come through the court process, and the law must be fixed. We have lawyers setting up elaborate schemes where they own facilities that doctors work at, and they go out and recruit somebody who isn't a minor fender bender and pick them up, get them to the doctor every day of the week, and then that lawyer gets to bill Michigan to pay for all of the services they provided to that person, and there's really no limit to what they can charge for picking them up, driving them to the appointment, what the doctor charges, what they get to charge on top of that for providing the connections. That bill that was voted on before, that was voted down, would have put a stop to those things that are just driving the costs out of control.
We have only a couple of minutes left, but people are concerned about schools. There was a report recently that Michigan is not spending enough on schools out of Michigan State. What's happening in education?
Well, you know, we continue to really struggle in this state in any debate, any report, any research, to be able to draw the distinctive line between what's going on in one area of the state or one school in the state versus another area, particularly urban versus rural, Upper Peninsula versus most of the state versus Southeast Michigan most of the time. And it's just making it really challenging when these reports come out and say, well, everybody's doing really badly. So legislature go out there and create a brand new program. Third grade reading was a prime example of that. And yet you can go around the district here and find so many schools that are doing a great job reaching out to those students who need those additional services. And now all of a sudden the state institutes a program and they have to jump through additional hoops because of that. And the funding is often much of the same problem, and that's why many of us from the UP continue to fight for the parity issue in funding. So there's a lot going on there. The new governor's got new ideas. I'm still very passionate about getting local control back over the curriculum. The state created this one-size-fits-all curriculum in 2004. Rep. Kivala and I and others were able to make some small changes in 14, but it's still very much a cookie cutter. Why shouldn't the local school, the local professionals, the local parents and student really have that control over what career path they'd like to pursue?
We have only 30 seconds left.
Okay.
You suffered a great tragedy last year with the death of your brother in an auto accident. How are you doing now with the farm and with your family?
It continues to be an amazing story of how God provides through tragedy and the community support, friends support. But it is still difficult, and why God has chosen to have us walk down this path and still sent me to Lansing, it's hard to say, but we're trusting Him, I'm trusting Him, and I just want to say thank you to so many people for that support and helping us during this time, but it's still tough work right now.
I'm sure it is. Thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Thanks, Don.
I'll have some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, this past week we experienced some very cold weather. Everyone was talking about the polar vortex as many things ground to a halt. Schools were closed, the state of Michigan shut down, even the post office stopped delivering mail. And while everyone was talking about how cold it was, many old-timers were heard saying things like, "This is just winter in the UP. The wind chill gets below zero every year, and I didn't miss a day of school when I was a kid because of cold weather." I'll avoid that discussion except to say we don't need kids walking to school or standing outside waiting for a bus when it gets 20 below and colder. What I would like to offer instead is a reminder that earlier generations didn't have some of the comforts we have today when it comes to dealing with winter's extremes. I remember how things were when I was a kid, and this may bring back some memories for some of you and provide some insights into how things used to be for those who are a little or a whole lot younger. You know, when I was 11 years old, I moved in with my grandparents, and one of my memories involves the furnace they had. For present generations, keeping the house warm generally means turning a thermostat on the wall. Back then it was very different. Grandpa and a lot of other people from that era had a furnace that burned coal, and while some homes had what was called a stoker, which automatically fed the coal into the furnace, we didn't enjoy that luxury. That meant you had to keep adding coal to the furnace through the day, and it was very important when you went to bed on a winter night to load the proper amount and do it just the right way so it would continue to burn through the night. If you didn't do it just right, it could be awfully cold by morning. The way the heat was distributed through the house had a lot of disadvantages, but also one big benefit. The furnace was in the basement, and directly above it on the main floor was a large grate, probably about 4 feet square. All the heat came up through that single grate and had to find its way throughout the house. There were no fans, vents, or hot water pipes. On the ceiling of the main floor, there were grates about a foot square. There was one for each room on the second floor. All the heat for the upper story had to drift up through those grates. I don't recall that it was ever too warm upstairs in the winter. I said the heating system had one big benefit, and that part was great. There was nothing better than coming in from the cold in the winter and standing on top of that big grate directly over the furnace. I can remember many times standing there and soaking in the heat. It was really a lot of fun to come in after playing in the snow. As you stood on top of the grate, the snow and ice would melt off your snow pants, and the furnace would hiss and sizzle as the drops of water landed on the top of the hot furnace. For me, thinking about the warmth and that sizzling, hissing sound is a very pleasant memory. But I have to admit, turning the thermostat on the wall has its benefits too. Back in a minute. So it's time for us to make way for the Today Show. Remember, for news anytime, go to uppermichigansource.com, where you can also see current and past episodes of this show. Well, things are starting to heat up in Lansing. Thanks to Senator Ed McBroom for coming in this morning to discuss some of the items on the legislative agenda. And thank you for being here. Look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.